I'm very curious about how you think someone starting up can sort of approach economics in this particular way. Is there a need, in some sense, for a self-conscious heterodoxy which rejects this entire approach, whether it's a perfect or imperfect competition? Is there a need for a group of people to be working outside, or do you think that there has to be dialogue? These are sort of difficult questions for graduate students and so on. So I just thought I should ask you, as someone who's done this.
Yes, that's a very important question. How does one approach the idea of working with a consistent framework? And as you'll see in the book, I don't operate outside of the orthodoxy in the sense that I pretend it doesn't exist. At every point in the book, whenever I make an argument that I think is the one that represents this classical approach, I also confront the empirical evidence and the other arguments in both orthodox economics and heterodox economics, which is, I think, the proper way. But imagine for a moment that you were able to take a course where you didn't have to do Becker micro and Lucas macro, but could just ask, can we move straight forward from micro to macro in a consistent way that's empirically consistent, and learn that, and then from that work to see how does heterodox economics with post-Keynesian theory work, or how does neoclassical theory work. And I make a plea to people to allow this alternative path to be taken as a serious, consistent framework, not as something you dip into to find what you like and then take something else. As we said earlier, I don't believe that you can mix and match theoretical foundations, which insofar as they're inconsistent. So I'm now urging my post-Keynesian friends, and all my friends are essentially post-Keynesian, certainly where I teach, to consider the idea that we can explain the phenomena that motivated post-Keynesian economics, price variations and cost variations and the empirical evidence on markups, as I show in the book, can be explained entirely from the idea of a competitive, dynamic, competitive process. That then we have a foundation for the theory of effective demand, we have a foundation for profitability, and we have also a warning of the limits to the theory of effective demand. Many people say, well, a neoclassical would say if you raise wages, you're going to hurt firms. On the left, we often say if you raise wages, it's going to increase aggregate demand, and therefore firms don't really understand that there would be the benefit. In this sense, I think it's wrong to say that. If you raise wages, it definitely hurts firms, and that you should be prepared for the fact that you're making a judgment about whether the damage to the firms is greater than the benefit of higher wages, or vice versa. So everybody understands if I raise a minimum wage to $100, a lot of firms will go out of business and people won't have the jobs, so there will be not any aggregate demand effect on that. So we're always talking concretely about the opposing and conflictual interests in the capitalist system. And that tells us something about limits. The limits are not fixed limits. They can be changed by law. They can be changed by history. But they are there. And if we approach it that way, we begin to understand why some things succeed even when we are allowed to do what we want, but they turn out not to work. For instance, in the 1970s, when Keynesian policy created unemployment and inflation rising at the same time. And I believe that then tells us there are ways to avoid that. Also, you cannot operate on the world if you don't understand how it works, because then the penalty is not yours. We seldom get executed like astrologers used to do for being wrong, but the people we practice on can suffer. And so I take this as a very serious responsibility.
I mean, just to sort of bring it around full circle, maybe this might be sort of the last question that I'd ask. You came of age in a moment of real political ferment where people were asking the same questions, and you mentioned, of course, that the same questions are being asked again today, and you've had to sort of trod a lonely path, and you've kind of, as you said, an archaeologist trying to find an alternative path. Are you optimistic about economics and economic thinking in the future? What would you advise a young person who wants to enter these kind of questions, given the turmoil in the world right now? I thought I should ask sort of the avuncular question.
Yes, and that's a very good question. So how should young people react? In my opinion, it's not just a should, it's a responsibility. It's the responsibility of every new generation to question things. It should be. But again, take that responsibility in the way that it should be, which is that you have to first find out what has been done. There's a certain tendency, which I see often of young people, think that because they just realize something, it's therefore the solution to everything, because they haven't really read or studied what has been done. So pay attention to history and to theory in the past, because a lot of these ideas were buried under the silt of political opposition, and people don't see them. But if you go back and look to see who said them, you discover that not only the idea that you just had was there, but the full working out of its implications and its limitations was also there. And that's part of what I've tried to do in this book, is to show that the ideas I'm putting forward as a coherent framework were there in bits and pieces. As an archaeologist, they were part of the ruins of past arguments. But when you see the overall structure, it's breathtaking, in my opinion, in its coherence, and that then people should take the responsibility to learn. I sometimes say to my students that, it's very exciting to say that you're going to invent it for yourself, and that it's tedious to say, well, other people done it. But would you really want to send your mother or your father to a surgeon who didn't bother to attend those classes because it's more exciting to figure out how to cut for yourself? And the answer is obviously not. Well, economics is a kind of social surgeons, and we need to have the right understanding. And so that brings us back to the old theme. Theory is very important, and you shouldn't think that you can just invent it off the top of your head. I'm therefore not in favor of what is eclectic views, where you put together one thing about social life and another thing about neoclassical theory, and you just move back and forth, because in fact these two conceptions are inconsistent. Try to be consistent.
Well, that's a good ending point. So thank you very much, Anwar. And
Thank you.